Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. Andy, good morning.
Good morning, Mike.
So let's kick off straight away. The clean air zone came up at Prime Minister's questions yesterday. Boris Johnson said that the proposals were unworkable, and this is the Prime Minister.
It's become clear that the scheme proposed by the Labour Mayor in Manchester is completely unworkable, will do more damage to businesses and residents in Manchester. So we must find an alternative, Mr. Speaker, that doesn't punish local residents. And my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for the Environment, will be saying more about this in the coming days.
So we are going to get a statement later today, we think, but unworkable was the Prime Minister's comments about the clean air zone. What's your reaction to that?
Well, a couple of things to say about that, Mike. Firstly, I am not the instigator of this scheme, nor the final decision maker in this scheme. It is not what he claims is my plan. We're getting used, aren't we, to half-truths, even no truths being told at the dispatch box. But this just feels to me as though that's the way things are going at the moment. But secondly, I told you last week, Mike, that it was me. I went down to London to tell his Environment Secretary that the plan is unworkable. It's Boris Johnson's defective directive that he has placed on our 10 councils that is unworkable.
Although it's not, though, Andy.
Driving that problem to you, Mike, on this hot seat through late last year into January, and they're playing politics with it, simple as that.
But although it's not Andy Burnham's initiative or Andy Burnham's solution, it is those council leaders and you in a team together. How much does it show, by the way, that you and those leaders are completely out of touch with people in Greater Manchester?
Well, it doesn't, because it's the nature of the directive that the government have put on the councils that is dictating the shape of the scheme. So let me remind people, they instructed all 10 councils to take action. They had no choice. And secondly, they set a date of 2024. And this is the heart of the problem now, Mike. The pandemic has disrupted vehicle supply chains. So the vehicles just aren't there for people to get, and if they can get them, the price has rocketed. And that is the problem. It's the government's directive that's unworkable. And actually on the charging point, they force us to model our plans against the charging zone. And if it was just us, Mike, why have Birmingham got a zone that includes cars? Why have Bath got a zone?
Nobody, Andy, at any point with you and those council leaders looked at that directive and said, well, the directive's wrong. You got the directive and said this, and I know it was last year, this is how we here in Greater Manchester will implement this directive. Now, how much of that did you not scrutinise enough and just maybe, this looks a great idea, let's go with this? And then it's gone for a ball of chalk.
No, it was different debate before the pandemic. And I can remember again being on this hot seat saying to you that they hadn't given us enough money. So the vehicles were there before the pandemic. And the argument, if you remember then, was that the government was, as always, trying to impose something on us without giving us the money, like they did with the Tier 3 debate. So myself and Councillor Andrew Weston, leader of Trafford, we were repeatedly saying, Mike, we haven't got enough money. And then in the middle of last year, they refused the hardship scheme that we asked for, i.e. special help for people with the oldest vehicles, window cleaners, plumbers who only have one vehicle, it's an old vehicle, they keep running. They refused help for them. And that is when we started to change our approach and said, look, you're putting us in a straitjacket here. We cannot make this scheme work if you're not giving us enough money, but also if the market is changing. And it was, we blew the whistle, Mike. We tried to do this in good faith because we do need to clean up our air. But it was actually myself and the 10 Greater Manchester councils who went back to the government and said, this is unworkable.
Well, there are those, Andy, that would say that you did that because suddenly it kicked off big style with people in the real world. So let's get those people in. They're on the phone now.
Can I just quickly say on that, Mike? I understand that comment, and honestly, I do, and I can see why people say it. But I was saying to you late last year, and I was commissioning research, and yeah, in some ways that was going on behind the scenes, and then the protests grew up. But the minute those protests came, I said, look, I hear what you're saying, and we're going to try and respond to your concerns.
All right, let's bring John in High Lane. Hi, John. Good morning.
Hello, good morning. Yes, hi.
Where you go, John?
Morning, John.
Yes, I've just got a question for the mayor. That's how could he sign off for a £2 million contract to erect 65 of these CAZ signs, which equates to about £31,000 per sign, when all these signs constitute are 2 aluminium poles and obviously the printed signage which is attached to. There's obviously labour cost to install them, but £31,000 per sign. It just seems a ridiculous amount of money of taxpayers' cash to be squandered.
Let me bring him in on this.
I didn't.
The misuse of public funds.
Sorry, say that again. I'm sorry, John. I missed that bit then.
Would he tender his resignation just for this alone, for the total misuse, in my opinion, of public funds?
Will you tender your resignation, Andy?
Well, no, I won't, because I didn't sign off on this contract. So it's a simple answer to you, John. I know it suits some people to kind of say this is all about me. Well, I'm afraid it isn't. It's a government directive on the councils. I think people need to just get their heads on that. It might suit people's narrative to say that I've done everything here, but I'm afraid I haven't. I did not sign off on that contract. There is a government joint air quality unit that is providing the funding to make the clean air zone happen. It's a government directive. It comes with government funding, John, and the government oversees the measures that are being taken to implement it. So how about people just starting to ask a few more questions in that direction before blaming us for everything?
We're on Facebook Live, by the way. Head to BBC Radio Manchester's Facebook page. Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester, is in the hot seat today. It's Thursday. We're going to squeeze as many calls in as we can. They're all of those subjects we're talking about, the clean air zone, but of course, we've got levelling up. We've got the extra towns. Barry in with me now. Hi, Barbara. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Barbara.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
We can.
Right, Andy Burnham, you've gone through all this, going on your statistics of the 1,200 deaths. So, where did you get the figures from? Because it was research conducted in the US to calculate premature deaths due to air pollution in 2016 by the Royal College.
So I'll get him to answer your question, Barbara. Where did you get your figures for 1,200 deaths, which is part of the equation and part of the debate about bringing this the directive into action in this way?
Partly from that study, Mike, but not only. We got information from the Greater Manchester NHS, so real information about hospital admissions for people with respiratory problems. I am more than happy to put out a full explanation for those figures. I think somebody was on the news headlines, Mike, before, weren't they, describing the issues that they have with regard to breathing in pollution. I went to a primary school on the Prince's Parkway once where a kid told me they couldn't play out in the playground on days when the pollution was heavy. This isn't, it's not like with COVID, people say we manufacture issues around people's health. This isn't a manufactured concern, it's a real one. It's why, Barbara, it's the law of the land. It's the law of the land.
The law of the land.
Barbara, by all means, engage in debate with Andy. You don't have to shout. How convinced are you by that answer? How satisfied are you with that?
I'm not convinced at all.
Why is that?
He's using a school that they've built major roads at the side of. That's what he's talking about. He's not actually talking about people. The only death that's recorded is one from pollution. Not 1,200. Not 1,200. This was conducted by the US.
So, Barbara, do you mind if I just do answer that? Because actually the phrase we've been using is premature deaths. So it's not necessarily the case that the pollution is the sole cause of death, but it's people with an underlying health condition or a respiratory condition like COPD that then kind of suffer more because of the road pollution. The primary cause of death may be something different, but the figure that we've given is premature deaths. So not deaths solely caused by air pollution. So I will put a fuller statement out for you, if you like.
Air pollution is in the air. You've plucked these figures from the air.
No.
nothing more. Nothing
I'm happy
more.
to account for them, Barbara, but can I just say this? I used to be the MP for Lee, and I remember people coming to my surgery, ex-miners, with serious lung problems from their work. And there are a lot of people that have lung problems, asbestosis, those kind of issues. Those people suffer more from air pollution caused by road traffic. Please don't minimise the fact that there's a health issue here. There is a health issue here. We can debate the statistics and the number, and I'll put more information out about that. But, I don't think you can just sort of say there is no problem. I said before, why is the law of the UK that air pollution in cities shouldn't reach certain limits? It's because of the damage it does to people's health.
Barbara, can I just interject, Barbara? Do you believe there is no air pollution?
Not according to the figures. We're down to 1 to 2.
So you think that we
We're
live...
the cleanest in Greater Manchester that we have ever been. So no, there isn't an air pollution problem. Go and have a look. The figures are there.
Andy, there's no air pollution issue in Manchester.
Well, the government doesn't say that, Mike, because their figures, the official figures, are that we've got a big problem, and therefore they have issued a directive to us to do something about that problem. And it's like with other callers, I don't know, fully understand why everyone just blames as though this has completely been dreamt up here. Why does York have a clean air zone? Why does Bath have a clean air zone? Why does Birmingham have a clean air zone? Why does London have a very large clean air zone? Because they've all been required to take action in the same way that we're being required to take action. And the reason why the figures may be a bit different at the moment, Mike, is because of the pandemic effect. When the lockdowns came in 2020 and 2021, there was a significant impact on road traffic. So those are not normal years to use to say that the problem's gone away.
I've got so many calls to get in. We're being inundated at the moment. If you are trying to get through, by the way, Andy Burnham's in the hot seat. 0800 218 2255. I've got texts and WhatsApps. I will try and squeeze it. Hi, Kevin. Good morning.
Good morning, Michael.
Andy's there, Kevin, so fire away.
Hi, Kevin.
Good morning. Good morning, Andrew. Andrew, I'd like to know, why do we have to use a French company to install those signs? I'm sure if the position was reversed, nowhere would the French use a British company. And I'd also like to know who's going to pay for those signs.
Well, on the second part, Kevin, I answered this before, it's the government. So the government are funding the clean air zone because they are imposing it on us. So that's why they have to pay for it. It's not coming from council tax. People's criticism of the Greater Manchester councils would have more resonance if all of this was coming from council tax, because then it would clearly be a local initiative. But it isn't. The government is paying for this because they're requiring us to do it.
Are they 30 odd grand a piece, Andy?
Do you know, Mike, I'll have to look into that, because as I said before, I have not signed off this contract. And so I honestly don't know. The government is overseeing the use of the funds to put in place the infrastructure. So I'll have to go back and get an answer for that for next week.
Any idea why we're using a French company to manufacture signs to go up in the UK?
A lot of them, Mike, are on Highways England land, so they're not actually, they're not signs that we're in control of. They are signs that are coming off the motorways. As people come off the M602 or other Highways England roads. So I'll have to look into it and give people a clear explanation of the signs issue, Mike. But I'm afraid I have not signed off those contracts for those signs. It's as simple as that.
Let me just get one or two messages, because I'm getting a load through. But we will get your calls and treat those as a priority. The Mayor, Andy Burnham's in the hot seat, in touch. I said, can you ask Andy to put the clean air bill to bed now for a few years and concentrate on helping pensioners on fixed incomes and people living on or under the poverty line, as we need to help them cope with the rising cost of living, poor housing and a lack of support for the authorities. Is it going to go to bed now for a few years, Andy?
I think to bed is probably the phrase I wouldn't use, Mike. But yesterday I said to the government that they've got to rip up this directive that says 2024 for compliance. That's a straitjacket that they've put our councils in that we just can't work with, because lots of people will be left paying fines and they can't escape them. It's just not right with the cost of living crisis. So I agree with actually where the questioner is coming from. And what we have said, what I have said to the government is, there's going to be, I would say, Mike, well, we know there's going to be 2 years disruption, don't we, caused by the pandemic, because we've lived that now already. But it is going into a third year. So I would say, give us a date of 2027. And if the government give us a date of 2027, we don't believe there'll be any need for charges. But this ball is in the government's court. Let me just be really clear about this, Mike. Nobody else can set the date for compliance. Only the government can do that. So they can either, in my view, 2024 is not doable, as I've said. So they go 2025, 2026, or 2027. My clear preference is 2027 for the very reasons that the person who's emailed in has said, but it's going to be for the government to decide what date they set for us.
And if you do get that change and that movement, can all those that were trying to purchase compliant vehicles or retrofit or have already done that, can they stop? And can those that were waiting for next year that had horse boxes, mobile homes, pickup trucks that they use as a domestic vehicle, etc., can they now breathe a sigh of relief?
Well, I certainly hope so, Mike, because I proposed yesterday that leisure vehicles, so camper vans, motorhomes, horse boxes, should be permanently excluded from the scheme. That is my clear preference. And again, that's an issue that will be dictated by the government's decision on the date. But that's what I've said. If the government was to go in 2025, I think it's going to be challenging. I would like to see if we could remove the sort of vans element completely from a charging zone. But that, I'm afraid, is in the hands of the government. We can't decide that. And there's one final thing on this, Mike, I want to say, because people think this is like a Trojan horse, isn't it? That it'll mutate into a congestion charge and it'll last forever and will constantly ratchet up the requirements on people. Well, let me just put that one to bed as well. This thing is a temporary clean air zone. It needs to last as long as we get to legal compliance with air limits. And I've already started conversations, Mike, with the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police to see if they would like to take the automatic number plate recognition infrastructure over and use it for policing purposes. Now, I realise that raises other issues and they would need to be consulted upon. But I just want people to know that this thing will be switched off the minute that it can be. And I've come on this hot seat, Mike, week after week to try and give people clear answers and respond to people's concerns. I am trying to respond to everybody's concerns, but I can't ignore the law of the land.
And just I was going to say,
our 10 councils, by the way.
And what I was going to say then as well, just to finish this part, and on the traffic and travel, we're still going to take your calls. Can the government ignore its own law of the land?
Well, it can change the law.
And that's what they'll have to do.
Perfectly possible. But at the moment, it was taken to court. This all comes, Mike, from the government losing a court case in the middle part of the last decade. And when it lost that court case, it then had to start issuing these directives on cities across England because it had to then act to bring air pollution in the UK in line with the law of the UK. I mean, that's basically where this comes from. And the reason why it's been such a hard thing for us to argue and the 10 councils to argue is because we are being told to follow the law. And we cannot and will not defy the law of the land. How can we do that?
Andy Burnham in the hot seat. He's the mayor in Chorley to talk to Andy now. Steve, good morning.
Good morning, Mike. Just listening to this now and listening to Mr. Burnham trying to take the credit for all that he's done for us. I believe that...
Steve, you've had a dig, mate. Let's get the question in.
And by the way, Steve, you live in Chorley, so I'm not your mayor.
No, I know, and I'm not fighting for me. I've got a compliant van. I'm fighting for the poor people of Greater Manchester that are going to be trapped in poverty.
What's your question, Steve, please?
It's a reminder that only 4 weeks ago, Andy Burnham told Alex that if he couldn't buy a new van, if he couldn't afford to comply, he would just have to pay the fine. Now, that was 4 weeks ago. Apparently, according to this morning's report, he's been fighting for us for the last 6 months. That doesn't sound like a man of the people.
Okay, Steve, I think we know where you're coming from. Let's get Andy to answer that. Andy?
Well, people will have to make their own judgment, Mike, but I've been on this show for weeks now, before Christmas, saying that we needed to fight for people. Go back to the summer of last year. I said that the government's refusal to give us a hardship scheme was going to cause a real problem. I commissioned research into the price of vehicles for precisely this reason. So it's all okay, Steve coming on from Chorley giving it the big one, but I'm sorry, Steve, you need to come on and get your facts right next time.
Steve, get your facts. Steve,
to buy a new van.
Steve, get your facts right next time.
He
And
told
he said,
Alex he has to buy a new van. On this show, he told Alex, if you can't buy a new van, you will have to pay the fine. I have that on record.
Andy?
I was explaining the position that we're in, but we were fighting for Alex so that he could get the funding to get a new van or changes to the scheme. And I'm sorry, I'll say it again, Steve. If you come on giving it a big one, you've got to keep it factual. I have been fighting for people all the way through this because I've never believed the government has given us enough money to do this fairly, and that's just a fact.
Well, if we've never had enough money, why has it got to this stage? Why did you knock it back at the beginning?
Because the government dictates it, Steve.
Spending money on cameras and signs. If it's not,
And I haven't done that, Steve. That's another fact you've got wrong.
Last night. The M61 was closed last night.
Steve,
Steve, there's another fact you've got wrong. The government has spent that money. Indeed, the government is spending all of the money on this scheme because they're dictating this scheme to us. But just like they did with Tier 3, just like they did with Tier 3 when they tried to impose that on us, they didn't give us enough money. I mean, you can have your narrative if it suits where you're coming from politically. But I'm saying to you, the government never treats the North properly. It does this all of the time. It imposes housing targets on us and then campaigns locally against the Greenbelt. It cuts our councils and then campaigns against them when they raise council tax. And it's doing exactly the same with the Greater Manchester Clean Air Zone.
Andy, Steve would say back to you, I mean, I do need to move on, that you're now playing the same politics back. That if you knew that there was a dearth of finance available for this initiative, why did you ever go down the road?
We constantly said it, Mike. They were imposing a directive on us. We had no choice, but we kept making the case. But I told you last week that I went down to Westminster to say to the government, lift this legal directive on us because it is not workable with the time frame you've given us and the funding that you've made available. But I said to him, work with us, take the politics out of it. Let's do this together. Let's just get a solution that works for people, the kind of person that Steve was describing. And what do I see? Jacob Rees-Mogg in the House of Commons. Oh, it's all the socialist mayor. It's all his fault. And what do I see? Boris Johnson at the dispatch box yesterday saying the same. When did we get to a point, Mike, where at that dispatch box people could just go in there and tell outright lies and just play politics?
So
that is the country we're living in at the moment.
I was going to say,
I am trying my best to resolve this for people.
So is the Prime Minister a liar where that's concerned, Andy?
Well, it's not the plan of the Labour mayor. You played the.
No, is he a liar?
Well, that isn't true. He's dealing in untruths, and I'll let people conclude what they think. Having been in Parliament myself, where we're encouraged not to use that type of language, I don't personally throw around language like that. But he is not telling the truth, the whole truth, when he's standing at that dispatch box, and people then should make their own conclusions about what that means.
Let's move, if we can, now to Les in Farnworth. 0800 2. He's in the hot seat. He's with you. Is in Farnworth. Hi, Les. Good morning.
Hiya. You're all right, Mike. How's it going?
I am. Where you go, Les?
Hi, Les.
Right. Okay, Andy. Right. I appreciate that you're saying you're not trying to knock this back by 1, 2, 3 years, whatever. But this tax is going to affect everybody, especially in the commercial market. It will knock onto the price of food, the price of everything. Right, we've already got MOT tests that are taken twice a year for taxi drivers, and emission tests is in that MOT, and also emission tests are done on wagons, I believe, every 3 months. Right, now, why can we not scrap this altogether, this zone, and put ordinary people into at least twice a year MOT instead of once a year? I'm a taxi driver and I see loads of vehicles belching smoke out, and all they do is one test a year and then they never touch.
Les, I get where you're at. I want to get Andy back on for this only because I've got loads of other callers to get on as well. So basically what Les is saying is, if you have a twice a year MOT for everybody, look at the emissions. If the emissions, if you're not fulfilling the criteria for those emissions, then you can't go back on the road again, and that would be a cheap and easy way of doing it.
So I definitely get where Les is coming from, Mike, with his question. Just on the point of just scrap it, it's like I said before, Les, it's the law of the land. So we're not in a position where we can say that, because we have to follow the law of the land, and we should. And of course, if you just scrapped it, we're kind of basically saying it's okay for kids with asthma and respiratory problems to breathe in air that's illegal. So I don't think we can say just scrap it. But I think what you're coming to is what we're thinking, which is there a different way of coming at this? I said yesterday, 2027. And if you push it beyond the pandemic and give people time beyond the pandemic, I think we can come up with different ways of doing this that would solve the problem without punishing people, as exactly in the way that you're describing. So, that's what I'm trying to do. And, I think we're kind of coming from the same place, apart from that point about scrap it, because we can't do that. Birmingham's got one, York is getting one, Portsmouth's got one, London's got a big one. Everywhere's having to do it, and we can't just sort of say, well, not us, we're special. We have to follow the law of the land.
Okay.
That's just a fact.
Thank you, Andy. Andy Burnham is the man. Good morning.
Good morning, Mike. Good morning, Andy.
Hi, John.
Good morning. A couple of points I'd like to make. I own and operate a fleet of HGVs in and around the Manchester area. No problems with that. But in the last 6 months, I've had to sell 3 of my vehicles because they comply with the Clean Air Act. Now, the price of second-hand vehicles in Manchester has actually fallen, completely gone, complete waste. I have lost thousands and thousands of pounds all because of this idea of the Clean Air Act. Who's going to compensate me? Anybody? I don't think so. Also, whose idea was it, this Clean Air Act? Another fact, I know lots of businessmen. We've been in this pandemic for nearly 2 years, and the people I know, they've not got the finances to buy new vehicles.
John, I'm going to jump in here and get Andy to answer the question, because basically there's a man who said that because of this initiative, Andy, that the second-hand vehicle market for HGVs has got dropped through the floor if the vehicles aren't compliant, and of course John's having to sell those vehicles at a loss. What would your answer to that be?
Yeah, well, I absolutely get where John's coming from, and I think he's made a number of fair points there. And it was that intelligence that I was picking up last year, Mike, that made me commission research into the vehicle market, because I needed proof if I was going to go back to the government. I couldn't just sort of assert it, but it was comments of the kind that John's just made from a friend of mine, actually, who runs a haulage business. It is definitely the case that people were struggling to access new vehicles and second-hand vehicles, and if they could, the price was higher. It will and has had an impact on people's businesses. Where did the idea come from, John? As I said before, it's the law of the UK that we can't have levels of road pollution that they are. And we obviously began by saying, well, businesses that are transport businesses have an incentive, don't they, to invest in vehicles, because that's the primary tool of their trade. Therefore, if we give them some financial support, they will be better placed to be able to change those vehicles and bring about a reduction in air pollution. Now, I appreciate it affects different businesses differently, and it's why I set up a support service for businesses affected at the Greater Manchester level. But while I hear what you're saying, we cannot deny that there's also a benefit from the Clean Air Zone, Mike, and I think sometimes the calls don't reflect the benefit. And let me just give an example on buses. If you go back to 2018, Mike, 80% of the buses on the roads, 10% of the buses on the roads of Greater Manchester met clean air standards. They were old, they were polluting, they often were picking up kids outside schools and almost choking them. Now, with the Clean Air Zone, 80% of buses will be this year compliant with clean air emission standards. That is a big change caused by the Clean Air Zone. So people say, well, who came up with the idea? It's an idea that is going to bring benefits for people, everybody, and we mustn't lose sight of that.
Derek and Wharton says that as petrol and diesel vehicles cease to exist, and of course it looks as if that might be the case in terms of buying new petrol and diesel vehicles by, I think it's 2035. Surely the air quality is just going to improve anyway, naturally, without, and I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, but without any legislation.
Yeah, and that's why, Mike, we're saying push the date to 2027, because the change that's coming anyway, that's been correctly identified there, means that, progressively we are seeing newer vehicles coming onto the roads and the air pollution is reducing. The point is, when the government gave us that date of 2024, the reductions weren't happening quickly enough to meet that deadline, and that's why the CAZ and the measures around it are needed. If they push that date out to 2027, then the natural change in cars and other vehicles and buses and HGVs, etc., will make it much more likely that it can be done without charges. And that's the argument that we have made to the government yesterday. It all depends on the date that the government chooses. 2027, I think, would take a lot of pressure off people. 2026 would be still difficult, but we could probably do it without really challenging people. 2025, I think it's hard to see how that could be done without charges, but that's the government's decision.
Do you think they'll listen to you? Do you think they'll turn around today and say, yeah, you're right, Andy, we'll change the law and we will knock it back to 2026 or 2027? What's the chances of that happening? And what happens if they don't?
Well, I don't know where they're coming from, because the civil servants are saying, this is all too difficult, and I had to persuade them last week, Mike. I went down last week and sat in a room with the Secretary of State, his junior minister, and all the civil servants from the Joint Air Quality Unit. And I had to persuade them that 2024 wasn't workable. I sat in that room and I did that. And I'd like people like Steve and Charlie to understand that. I had to go and argue to say that the government scheme that's been imposed on us is not doable. And they said, well, we'll have to consider what you're saying and get back to you. And I'm still waiting for them to get back to me when the Prime Minister pops up in the Commons and plays politics with it. So, the legal advice the government is getting is different from what politicians are saying, because they're in political difficulties. It feels to me like they're kind of doing and saying whatever they like at the moment.
But do you accept... Go on. Sorry.
Well, I don't. Okay, no, you ask me. But
do you accept that people are saying, well, that's what you're doing exactly the same? You're in a difficult political position, and that's why you were hot-footing down to London?
No, because in some ways I could, I could pull out of this and say, well, it's the government's putting it on the councils. It's nothing to do with me. But I don't work like that. Obviously, it does affect Greater Manchester. It does affect people here. I want to clean up the air, but I also want to protect our residents. And I've been in the kind of middle of this for a long time now, trying to get to the right solution. A solution that does clean up the air, Mike, but is fair to people.
Okay.
And as I said before, I always have my concerns about what the government were doing, but they've been made worse by the pandemic. And I'm now trying to get a solution here that works for people. And I would say to the government, work with us, take the politics out of it. Let's have a date that allows us to get to clean air, but without punishing people. And that's the pitch that we made to the government yesterday.
The hot seat today, we're on Bridge, and is my next caller. Hi, Elaine. Good morning.
Good morning, Mike.
So Andy's there, Elaine?
Yeah, very brave man. Good morning, Andy.
Good morning, Elaine.
Right, now, I actually voted for you a long time ago, but I think when you say you go to government and you are giving them these answers and it all changed yesterday, I like what you're saying there, but you've left all this clean air zone in a massive panic, because my village, all the posts went up, all the signs, it's a village split in half. Now, on the Wigan side, on the Manchester side, we've got the two shops, and they've just gone through horrendous times with COVID, trying to deliver to the village, and the other half of the village, it's in West Lancs, they say, we can't come over now, we can't use the shop, so it's going to be half a village going to another village to shop, and no one crossing the boundary for the fine, because people in semi-rural areas obviously have diesel cars. I changed mine years ago. I have a rented electric. We all do our bit for the planet with the grandchildren. It's a bit brutal, to tell you the truth. And I really want to say, Andy, you should come out or send people out. They should be our local councillors that you all have contact with, and they should come out and have meetings and listen to people.
Elaine, I'm only going to move on there so that Andy can answer your question. Andy.
No, well, I think Elaine puts her point really fairly, Mike. And I live in an area, Elaine, that's like you, that's right on the border between an area that has the clean air zone and doesn't. So I understand the points that you're making. It won't include cars. It never will. I honestly want to reassure you about that. And actually, cars are already largely compliant, Elaine. They had better emission standards a long time ago. The clean air zone, we're saying now to government, it should start in May, but without fines. So vehicles that are in breach should be getting notices to say, you would have been fined, but we're now going to help you to change your vehicle so that we can obviously improve the air quality. And what we hope is, if the government sets the right date, that there wouldn't be a need to impose it on vans, particularly in areas like the one that you described, because obviously the problem gets greater, doesn't it? The more you go towards the centre of Greater Manchester, the problem gets bigger and bigger, effectively. So I think what I would say to you is, we're listening, and I'm sure your local councillors are listening as well. I think we're going to get this thing to a better solution. But I would just say, and I like what you said, that it was the right thing to do. I did go down in good faith to the government last week, and I said, look, we've tried to implement your directive. It's proved impossible. So just now work with us, cut us some slack here, and let's see if we can recast this scheme together to make it work. And what I observe, I'm afraid, is a lot of politics that they're playing with it. But I would still say to them, in the interest of residents in Appley Bridge and anywhere else in Greater Manchester, put the politics to one side, sit round down the table, let's solve this together, and because I believe it is possible to solve it and get a solution. And I just think that would be so much better, wouldn't it, for everybody?
We've got a text, we've got so many to come through, and said Manchester needs a clean air zone now, not in 2027. To wait is going to cost lives, and that's the other side of the argument, because this is Katie Neal yesterday from the environmental charity Client Earth.
They seem to be framing this as a decision between protecting businesses and protecting people's health, and that's a really, really damning reflection of the failures that have happened here. There's already been a huge delay to action. Legal limits for pollution should have been met over 12 years ago. It is absolutely exhausting to think about how much time local and national government have had to design and implement these solutions and to help people. The latest suggestion from the Mayor is that they should be holding off now until 2027. People should have to wait for another 5 years to be safe from illegally polluted air. That cannot be right. Like I said, it's been 12 years since they should have, started thinking about this.
So that's the other side that you've got to answer as well, Andy. What she's saying is, why aren't you starting this tomorrow, basically?
It is the other side, Mike. And I think the truth of the matter is, they're trying to say, we're trying to say we're protecting businesses and that's more important than health. As I've always said, we're trying to do both, Mike. We're trying to protect people's health and protect people's businesses. And to be honest with you, that was exactly what we were debating on the hot seat through the pandemic, wasn't it? We understood the restrictions were needed to protect health, but we also knew they were impacting on people's businesses. And constantly you have to do both of those things. People who say you only have to do one of those things isn't living in the real world, in my view. So you have to find the right balance. And Client Earth and others who campaign on these things should give Greater Manchester some credit for having taken action to implement the directives that the government imposed on us. Because as I said before, buses have already dramatically changed in Greater Manchester. Think about that, Mike. 90% of buses on our city regions roads didn't meet air emission standards in 2018. And that figure's now shrunk right down to 20%. So that is a massive change that comes about because of this. John from Alderman, I feel for John, don't get me wrong, but HGVs have changed as firms have moved towards getting compliant vehicles. So we are. This is already improving the air quality in Greater Manchester. It is happening. It is getting better. But obviously we've landed at the really difficult bit. And, and people are rightly raising concerns because it impacts their business and their livelihoods. And I will never be the mayor that walks away from that, Mike. I mean, people have kind of made political points to suggest that I have done or that I've never only woken up late to this. I've been arguing all the way through that the government hadn't given us enough money, just as I did all the way through the Tier 3 debate.
Graham in Salford. Graham, hi, good morning.
Good morning, Mike. Good morning, Andy. Thanks for having me on.
Hi, Graham.
Just a couple of very, very quick points I'd like to make. Firstly, there isn't a dirty air problem in Greater Manchester. Now, that's from your own website. If you look at it any time of the day or night, it's green right across the board in all of Greater Manchester. Right now, we know the government mandated the clean air zone. We know that. But it was you and the Greater Manchester councils that decided the size of it, 493 square miles, and that it would be a charging zone when the government specifically said to you, you do not have to have a charging zone. So the people understand, Andy, that it was a government directive, but the people also understand and clearly believe that the current CAZ is the creation of Andy Burnham and the 10 councils with no democratic input from the people.
Andy.
Okay, they're good questions there, Mike, and I want to give them a proper answer. So the point about air quality is fine, Graham. You can't just look at it at any one given time. They take an average over a year, and the government verifies that average over the year. So there are days when it can be atrocious because the motorways clog up or whatever. So you've got to take it over the year. So that's point one. Now, let's get to the heart of what Greater Manchester did decide. So you say that we decided the size, and the point is on this, it's the directive is on the 10 councils. The choice, every council in Greater Manchester had to do something, and the choice therefore was between a sort of smaller clean air zone within the borough or a bigger one. So that is a fair challenge. The judgment was, if Greater Manchester was a patchwork of small clean air zones covering the 152 sites that don't meet air compliance, the public, it would have just been totally and utterly unworkable, because vehicles would have been sort of skirting the boundaries of those. The boundaries would keep changing. It wouldn't have made any sense whatsoever. We couldn't have implemented it. On the charge,
couldn't you return very quickly? Couldn't you return to government and say we can't implement this? This is useless. You're asking us to do something that literally isn't possible. Have another think about it.
Before the pandemic, Mike, I think it was possible because the funding available would have got closer to the cost of vehicles. But as I say, the pandemic changed everything. But on Graham's points about charging, it's the date of compliance that has driven that, because they gave us a really tough date of compliance, 2024. No other measures, Graham, get you to that compliance unless you go for the tougher measures. And the government said we had to model our scheme against the default option of a charging clean air zone. So again, if we were unique on this, we'd be the only area doing it. But Birmingham has a charging clean air zone with cars included, which we don't. So does Bath, so does London. Other areas are having to introduce them as well. So, by all means, hold us to account for the decisions and the judgments we reach. And I'm like anybody else. I will, be held accountable for those. But don't try and say it's all about us and we're uniquely punishing the public, because we're not doing that. We're just doing what everyone has to do when you get a directive from the government.
I've got Tony and Marple with us now. Hi, Tony. Good morning to you.
Hello.
Hi, Tony.
Hello, Andy. I'm a small coach operator based in Marple. I was one of the people that probably would have ended up losing jobs and losing my business if this went ahead. And my question, you keep saying, I've been listening to you for weeks, that you stand up for local businesses and local jobs. Now, my vehicles we do schools, and they're out maybe an hour and a half in the morning, an hour and a half in the afternoon, and we've engaged with our local MP, William Ragg, who's really been helpful. We've engaged with Transport for Greater Manchester, who have done nothing. We had a letter from them to say the big bus companies, Stagecoach First, that are multi-millionaires, their training vehicles are exempt, and they're on the road 12, 14, 15 hours a day training drivers when they can easily afford to put compliant vehicles on. Small business like me that could have been put out of business if this went ahead, we get nothing.
So Stagecoach gets an exemption, and Tony Marple, who's small coach operator, gets told sling his hook.
Well, not quite, Mike, because Tony, I definitely recognise the particular challenges facing the coach industry. I think you were very badly hit, weren't you, by the pandemic and the impact on the leisure market particularly. So, yeah, we understand that. But actually, because of that, a decision had been taken to delay coaches entering the scheme, Mike, already, and they were going to be given more time than buses. So that was on that's on the current scheme. But as I've been trying to say this morning, Tony, because of the accumulation of evidence affecting all vehicles and all businesses, it was Greater Manchester that now has gone back to the government and said 2024 is unworkable. It's not achievable, and that's just what we've done. And the money would have been not enough, would it, for businesses like yours, because obviously the cost of a coach and the cost of the money that was being made available, particularly with the increase in the cost of vehicles, has made it all very difficult indeed. The only thing I will come back on, if I can, Tony, is you mentioned doing schools. Can people be truly comfortable with vehicles that don't meet emission standards doing the school run? What I observe, Mike, around Greater Manchester is there are some very old buses doing some of that work, going to colleges, sixth form colleges, FE colleges. I in many ways, it brings home the reason of why we need to take action, because obviously at those locations, kids should not be breathing in harmful air pollution. So as tough as it is, we're going to have to take some action, but all the while helping businesses like Tony's navigate the change. And that's been the position I've always had and I will always stick to.
And excuse me again, Tony, I've had to move through all the calls as quick as I could. Very quickly, I've got a couple of questions. But first, last of questions from outside the studio. This is a message, and thanks for all your calls, all your messages. Obviously, we couldn't get everybody on. The most recent data is from 2020. And that's skewed by COVID. So this is from Chris in Longton. Are we not calculating this off what is now inaccurate and out of date data? Is there I think Chris is saying, is there a way of revising the data anyway before you go any further?
Well, it's a fair point, and I've been asking the same question, Mike, through this. The answer is it's not entirely in our gift. There's something called the Joint Air Quality Unit that is a UK government body that verifies the data. I think the problem we've got is, although it did dip in 2020, as I said before, because of lockdowns, and in 2021, because of the same reason, all the evidence suggests that road traffic is recovering fully in terms of the volume of road traffic. It's the trams, it's the buses, it's the trains that aren't recovering fully. People are not taking public transport in the same numbers as they were before the pandemic. So road traffic is likely, in our judgment and the government's judgment as well, to be at or above pre-pandemic levels as we go through the rest of this year.
Let me finish now. I've got a couple. One's as a human being, but I'll finish with that. But last of the questions today, we've been talking about this issue for a full hour, and we've done it for a full hour for the last, apart from last week, 2 weeks before that. Now, so basically, this has been the dominating issue on the hot seat for the whole of January.
Yeah.
And possibly for weeks to come. Is there anything, or what do you think is going to be different by this time next week when you come on this hot seat? What are you going to do?
I hope, Mike, a solution is now in sight. The ball is in the government's court, but I say that not to sort of be provocative. I just hope that they kind of play that ball back to us in the spirit in which I put it in their court, which was kind of work with us to get this right. Because playing politics with it will get us absolutely nowhere. Get a solution that cleans up the air, protects people's jobs, livelihoods and businesses. And they can do that, Mike. They can do that. I'm expecting them to get back in touch with me any day now, because the Environment Secretary said to me he would get back to me within 7 to 10 days, and that was 8 days ago now. So he can come back to me and he can say to me, okay, the date for compliance is 2027. That would be the ideal solution. Or he could say the date is 2026. I mean, the first one I would prefer. The second one, I think I can work with our councils to see if we can make make it stack up properly for people. If it's 2025,
right,
it's going to be challenging.
Okay,
that's the position we're in, Mike. The ball is in the government's court. Let's hope they play it back in the spirit of getting a solution.
Well, I am running out of time, but I will try and squeeze my final question in. It is on time scale, quick as you can, Andy, and thank you once more for being in the hot seat. And we hope that you'll be back with us in the hot seat next week. What's your time limit? When do you expect them to get back to you? This afternoon? Tomorrow morning? What do you think?
Well, they did say 7 to 10 days. So I think that does suggest tomorrow is the latest. I'd expect to hear by the close of play tomorrow if they're going to stick to what they said. So let's hope they do, Mike, and let's try and move beyond this issue for everybody. Because let's be fair, I need to say this finally, Mike. I have never minimised people's worries. People like Tony and Marple, other people, have been worrying about their businesses and their jobs, and that's the reason why I've approached it in the way that I have. There's some politics here, but there's a lot of real people kind of genuinely worried about this issue. And that's why we need to resolve it properly once and for all.
See you next week in the hot seat. Thank you, Andy.
See you, Mike.
Andy Burnham.